Good morning, everybody. This is Scott McMeans with Action Coach SBL, and we are honored today to have India Johnson from UA Vistas with us. Given her great background and experience, I look forward to hearing her story and learning about her journey to success. So, India, introduce yourself to everybody, and then we'll get into some questions. So please, the floor is yours.
Hello, my name is India Johnson. I'm the founder and CEO of UA Vistas. We are situated in East Cleveland, Ohio, which is where I was born and raised. And I'm super passionate about nature. And I'm a certified drone pilot. And those two things kind of came together to create the business.
Outstanding. So tell me a little bit more about the synergy between your interest in nature and being a drone pilot. How does that actually come together for you?
So I always loved animals since I was a kid. And then as I got older, I started learning about ecosystems, plants. When I went to college, I studied chemical engineering. So yeah, nothing but what I was into as a kid. Realized I didn't like chemical engineering. So switched to biology, environmental science, with a focus on ecology, and then later marine biology and ecology, and studied computer science. So that came together and created like this love of tech, and then had a love of nature. Like, okay, I want to do the two things together. How do I do tech stuff and nature stuff? When I graduated, there wasn't really much to do that combined both of the things. I looked and looked, and I'm like, okay, there's not, especially not in the Midwest. Maybe if I went to like California or something. So I went full tech and kind of kept this idea in the back of my head that if I want to do the tech and nature thing, I'll have to do it myself. So fast forward to a time after I got my remote pilot's license, became a certified drone pilot, had been a pilot for a while. Like, okay, well, I can combine all of these things to start this business and do these cool things that I've written down in all these notebooks.
What is it that you wrote down in your notebooks? What is it that, okay, maybe the best way to explain to us what UA Vistas does.
So we are a drone services company that focuses on using drones in environmental conservation. So we're a startup and a small business. So we perform general drone services. So like videography, photography, specializing in mapping and survey, particularly of natural areas. But we're working on building a system that will allow me or another pilot to go out and get different types of sensor data. So going beyond just RGB data, but getting infrared, hyperspectral data, thermal data, and then combining that in our software. And we're building software to process that data and analyze it using AI, so machine learning, deep learning, computer vision, to get insights about the natural areas that we're collecting data in. So right now we're working on tree disease detection. How can we detect it as early as possible? We're looking at invasive species detection. How can we find an invasive plant before it gets out of control? And then we want to move into wetland health assessment. So I live East Cleveland, Ohio. Lake Erie is like right there. Lots of watersheds, lots of wetlands. So, how can we make sure those are healthy? And then there's also pollution detection, fertilizer runoff. There's a lot of things you can do with multispectral, hyperspectral imagery. And we're trying to figure all those things out, and how do we make processing that data efficient?
That is incredible in the sense that you're using some of the most advanced technologies and your skill set as a pilot to figure out what nature is doing. It's a very interesting connection, and I'm glad you explained it, because not too many people understand what it takes to understand the nature of things. And being able to build a business along that cannot be easy. So what I want to know is, how would you attribute what's been successful for you? Right? What makes UA Vistas a success within that very interesting and rather specific niche?
So I think one thing, being in that specific niche helps a lot. So we provide drone services. In Ohio, especially, there's like a dearth of drone pilots. We don't have enough pilots to fulfill need. So that helps. And then being in a space where we're using drones for environmental work, we also use drones for education work. So that's actually the other part of the business that I didn't even mention. I'm actually working on 2 projects right now. That part of droning is actually very popular. So using drones in education, super popular, really kind of hot right now. And then the environmental side is not as hot, but it's kind of a new frontier. So we're kind of doing both. Like we have this really hot side of things, and then we have the new frontier side of things. And it combines sort of this revenue generating side of the business and then this research and development side of the business. And the environmental stuff is very research and development. So collecting data, figuring out what it says, and kind of iterating on that data collection and processing process. But because of all the environmental issues that we're facing, and then a larger focus on education, at least where I live, especially in aerospace, there's been opportunities left and right. I need capacity to fulfill opportunities, which is kind
It's
of
a good
now.
it's a good problem to have, India. It's a good problem to have when the opportunities are so abundant that you can take advantage of the ones that fit you and your skill set the best. So you're in a very good spot. Now that we know a little bit about your business, I want to learn a little bit about you and what is it that drives you to be the success that you are. So we've understand a little bit about your business and that you have a very successful niche and you're kind of bridging the gap between a revenue generating side and an educational side and then the environmental side. So you have this interesting concept of high tech and nature. But what is it about India that makes you click? So talk to me a little bit about your work-life balance and how does that actually play out for you on a routine basis?
So I think, I don't know where I heard this term or where I read this term, but I'm sort of a synthesizer. So I operate best when I am taking in a lot of information, especially reading. For some reason, reading really makes things stick for me. And then like combining information from sometimes disparate sources into ideas. And so that's one of the things that works well for, I think, this kind of business. I always have ideas where I can sort of pivot in the same area. So I'm still passionate about it. It's still either education, it's still environment, and I can pivot within that based on all these ideas. So that kind of keeps me going. Also, love nature, love the environment, love plants, love learning about animals, plants, new things. Just, I don't want to see it go away. So it really keeps me going, especially in this era of climate change, which is super, super, it's scary. Like it's scary. Like, what's going to happen? How can we fix it? So that definitely keeps me on this track. In terms of the day-to-day, like work-life balance, there's not really a balance at this point.
Okay.
Early stage. I'm an early stage startup founder. I used to, so when I started the business, I worked full time and was working on the business. I did that for a little over 2 years. It was a lot.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, okay, when I go full time into the business, it's going to be less. Like I'm going to have more time and things are going to be a little easier. No, no, that is not what happened. Don't ask me how. I guess when you have more time, I'm the type of person I find ways to fill it. So yeah, not too much balance. So right now I'm working on the business. There's a few education projects I'm working on. There is a environmental project I'm working on, some R&D, and then I'm also in a coding boot camp right now, actually, that focuses on so I do have a programming background, but this boot camp focuses on data science and machine learning, which I didn't get to study in my undergrad. So yeah, and I'm fundraising. So I'm definitely finding ways to fill in every waking moment that I have.
Yeah.
And that's just, it's not the healthiest thing, but it's also not new for me. I've always kind of done that since my late teens. Um, I don't recommend it necessarily. It's just kind of how I operate. So work very much seeps into life, and to avoid being too stressed and burnt out is something I'm still kind of working on.
I think a lot of people are working on that. And the challenge comes when you are as passionate as you are about what you do, and that happens to be what you do for your business or for a living. It's hard to unblur those lines, right? And you're getting there, right? You're going to find ways to carve paths that make the most sense for you. And I give you kudos for that. Um, how many employees do you have right now?
Mm. So right now I'm the only like full-time employee as founder
Mhm.
CEO. I contract one person, our interim CTO, on the regular, so he's a contracted part-time employee. And then I will occasionally contract other drone pilots to help fly, either to help fly areas or to help education projects. Um, One of the people that I contract fairly regularly is my former boss at my full-time job I had. So he left before I did, and we work together. So he's an expert in remote sensing and also a fellow drone pilot. Been in the drone space kind of since its inception in Ohio, I think like 2011-ish. Um, and he's helped me with education projects. So he's an expert at mapping. So we'll break things up into like drone sections, mapping sections. Um, so it's kind of floaty, I guess, how many employees
Mhm.
I have at any given time. But about 3 or 4 people I'll contract, and then 1 or 2 I'm working with contracting like kind of regularly, all part-time.
Okay. And if I understand you correctly, because you made a comment earlier about there's not a lot of drone pilots in Ohio, especially the Cleveland area. I would imagine India, it's a very small but very tight network of people that you know and work with. What is it about those people that draws you to work with them over and over again? Is there a certain criteria, a certain quality of person that you look for?
Mm. So I like for them to be safe drone pilots, that know how to fly. So a little bit of background, there's kind of a disconnect between people who, so to fly commercially in any capacity, like any capacity where you're making any kind of money or making someone else money, you need to have a remote pilot certification through the Federal Aviation Administration. To get that, you essentially take a test. Right now, there's no practical. So you don't have to actually fly a drone to get your certification. So what you see is this disconnect sometimes between these people who have their certifications and their ability to fly.
Yeah.
Um, so you have sometimes groups of people, like sometimes you actually see with airline pilots. So they'll, they know all the basics. They can easily take the test, but it doesn't mean they would have flown a drone. And so sometimes you see with people who are certified, they'll crash your drones, like a lot. Um, just because that practical experience and then having someone to say, okay, the weather today is great for flying, or the weather today, even though it's not raining, even though it's not a tornado, is not good for flying. Like, a drone will crash in this scenario. Or just doing simple things like checking the height of the trees or the buildings before you go up into the air and do your main flight. Um, Looking up, which is something when I first started flying, something I would forget to do. So when the drone takes off, like it's important to just do that. Is there a tree branch 10 feet above you that the drone is going to fly right into? Um, just little things like which way is the wind going? Are there metal structures nearby? Because that'll interfere with the signal and the communication between the drone. So you might get a fly off. Things like that that you learn as you're flying or as you're trained. It doesn't necessarily come to you from taking the test. So I really vet for people who simply enough actually can fly and not crash.
It sounds like an easy requirement, but I'm interpreting your language and your facial expressions to say it's a lot harder to find that person than one would think. Simply because they can fly doesn't mean they can actually fly. I want to ask you, is you're spinning a lot of plates here as the owner, CEO, the founder, and you've got these different employees that are coming and going, whether they're contracted for a day or an extended period of time. What is the biggest misconception people have about owning your own business that you would like to identify and correct them as far as this is what it really is to own your own business?
So I think owning your own business, so there's this idea of, oh, you're free, you don't have a boss, you can do what you want to do. And then there's this even sexier notion of owning a startup. It's like, oh, you own a startup, like you're a celebrity, it's so cool, you're rolling in money, like you sleep in piles of cash. And it's just not like that. People think like as a startup founder, like people just throw money at you, and it doesn't work that way. So on the first note, like I have a lot more freedom. Like I have the ability to better direct my time, to better choose what I'm working on. And I like that. So that's one of the reasons that I'm doing this. I can focus on environmental conservation. I can focus on education. I can focus on areas that I'm super interested in or I think need to be addressed. But it's hard. Like, you're constantly worried about money. How are you getting revenue in? How are you going to pay your bills? Are you getting enough revenue to support, just yourself? Do you have enough money to contract other people to help? Or are you going to have to fly solo, and take on more of the burden because you can't afford to pay anyone? There's a lot of uncertainty in it. So a lot of other founders and startup founders I talk to, they're like, okay, you have to embrace uncertainty. That's what they say. Embrace uncertainty because it's going to be uncertain. You're not going to know where your next contract is. You're not going to know how much you're going to make. You're not going to know what's going to happen 6 months from now. And as someone that's done both, so I had a 9 to 5, I've worked part-time, I've worked full-time, I've run the business, done gig work. There is a big difference between knowing where your next check is coming from, every week, every 2 weeks, and not. Huge difference. It's totally different ways of living. And people oftentimes don't understand that. So before they start a business, before they go freelance or do whatever, think about, can you deal with that uncertainty? Do you have a plan to deal with that uncertainty, especially financially? Then there's the work aspect. So usually when you're, 9 to 5, you're 9 to 5. And there are easier ways to make sure you kind of stay 9 to 5. You don't have to do overtime. If they're like, hey, stay over and do these things that we're not paying you for, you're like, you're not paying for those things, I'm gonna go home. You don't really have that option always with a business. Like sometimes you get as much as you put in, and sometimes you have to put in 60 hours a week, 70, 80 hours a week. And that can fluctuate a lot. Right now I'm working on contracts, trying to build revenue, doing the boot camp, and then also working on fundraising, non-VC right now. So that is a lot of grant applications with deadlines. So I can't necessarily be like, oh, hey, shift your deadline a week so I can get some sleep. No, I have to be up at, 10 p.m., 2 in the morning to get it in. And that's just kind of life. And then I think people also on the startup side of things, they think fundraising is really easy because you see all these people, it's like, oh, this company got $5 million and this company got 10 million. And yeah, I will assure you, it is nowhere near as easy as it looks. And then the people who got that money probably just grinded for months, even years to get to that point. So one of the things I have been doing recently was learning about VC funding. So going through these like investment readiness programs and talking to VCs and talking to entrepreneurs who've raised money recently and in the past. And I know I was so excited going into it about getting VC dollars, venture capital dollars. And by the time I finished talking to people and going through the programs, I'm like, okay, this is not for me, for my business right now. Because for one, like some of the founders I talked to, they got their round. And I'm like, oh my gosh, congratulations. It's so exciting. And the look on their face was just so like stressed and worn down. Mm-hmm. One person, they had just gotten their funding round and they're taking a hiatus. They're leaving it to their co-founder for 6 months because of just the burnout. And then, your VC, essentially your new bosses breathing down your neck.
Yeah.
And that's something I had to take into account. It's like, okay, so once you take people's money, they're your new boss. And they get parts of your company typically. So I had to sort of weigh things like, okay, this isn't for me now. I'm going to look at non-dilutive options that are still stressful because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work for sometimes not a lot of money, yes, but there are strings attached. So those are just some of the misconceptions that I think people need to know about, owning a business, starting a business, and then having a startup. Like it's not easy. It's a lot of work, especially at the beginning. And then hopefully, this is my goal as well, I can kind of not step away, but not work 60, 80 hours a week.
Yeah, that's the goal. Everybody should realize just because you own the company doesn't mean you don't have a job, right? Mm-hmm. So the ultimate goal is to have a business, which is a commercial enterprise that is profitable and works when you are not there. That is a great definition of a business. A lot of people want that. A lot of people aren't willing to work for that. Yes. Big difference is how do you go from where you are now to attaining that? You have to follow your plan, and you have been successful to date. There's no doubt that you will continue to be successful. I do have one last question for you. What advice, and you're not very far removed from the year 18, but I want to know, what advice would you give the 18-year-old you?
Ooh. Okay. Let's see. So I would have just been starting undergrad. Undergrad. It was rough. It was an adventure. I don't know. Like I did a lot of what I needed to do. I think did a lot of stuff right. One of the things that I would have liked 18-year-old me, honestly, I would have liked like 14, 13-year-old me. Because see, the thing about being a teenager is that, you have a lot of time. You have a lot of money, you have a lot of time. Make passive income routes, like super, super early. Yeah. Whether that's, writing, whether that's e-commerce, whether that's investing. I did start to invest. I invested later in my undergrad. A broke college student, didn't have a lot to invest until I actually started working. But I made investing a very important goal of mine. And that ended up actually helping me to do the business. So having that extra money to fund it initially, and then when I was separated from my full-time job, having money to live off of until I could get the business revenuing. Yeah. Any 18-year-old me, invest early as possible. Find ways to make passive income, or at least semi-passive income. that can kind of grow as you go. Because I started investing at 18, like in real estate or something, you know. And then just kind of, I can't say make a plan because I had plans at 18. Most people have plans at 18.
Mm-hmm.
Best laid plans of mice and men. Like it's a windy road.
Yes.
So I can't tell 18-year-old me to do that. But I would say definitely try to make as big of a financial cushion as possible.
Okay.
Um,
Very good.
However you can. And then, go from there.
Great advice. Great advice. All right. Well, what I'd like to say is thank you very much, India, for being a part of this. It was an amazing conversation. I really appreciate you going into your background and experience and the ability that you have to merge the nature and the technology, and somehow your passion is in both of those spaces. That's an exceptional space for you to be in. And I appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Any last final words?
Oh, I don't know. Thank you. Thank you, Scott, for having me on and interviewing me. I'm honored. Truly. This was
My
great.
pleasure. My pleasure. You were a great guest. And we'll talk to everybody soon on the next Business Spotlight. Bye now.